Hello everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of Video Clips. We'll talk about consequences today. First thing, just a reminder, interested in careers, interested in taking classes from us, joining. We have, 2,500 hours of programming here on everything from kidney stones to cancer, career training, free trial membership, newsletters if you're not on our newsletter list, free yoga class online, free workout, virtual workout. So PamHopperMSN.com if you want to talk about any of the stuff we do here. We rock here. We even own a school. We train health professionals. We really have it going on here. So if you want to talk about any of that stuff, send me an email. All right, Amber Rose Isaac, age 26, died during childbirth because she was unable to get treatment for the condition that killed her during the COVID crisis. She began noticing her platelet levels were dropping in February, but was unable to get an in-person appointment. Her regular checkups were virtual. She just filled out forms and checked her own blood pressure. She continued to get worse, was finally admitted to Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx in mid-April. Doctors induced labor 3 days later, over a month before her due date, because she had HELLP, H-E-L-L-P syndrome. And this involves a low platelet count. It's treatable. The point of the whole thing is that it's treatable if the baby's delivered prematurely. In many cases. According to Dr. Joya Creer-Perry, founder and president of the National Birth Equity Collaborative, people generally don't die from this because it's easily managed with treatment. Isaac, however, was treated too late and, this is choice, died alone in the room during her C-section since no one was allowed to be in there with her. Remember how dangerous it is to have loved ones around when something concerning is going on. You want to separate people from their loved ones. So as we talk about some of the terrible things that are going on as a result of this, I'll remind you that on Tuesday, I mentioned that Dr. Fauci, Mr. Fauci, I'm not going to call him doctor anymore, but Fauci calls this just inconvenient. This is really inconvenient, people dying of treatable diseases. That's part of what he considers inconvenient. We live in Alabama. Opticians cannot see patients, really. Well, one answered the phone in Huntsville. They were ordering things needed, but nobody could repair both broken glasses. They could order a new pair, but no guarantee it will fit properly. This is crazy. My husband stepped on his glasses. Luckily, he had an old pair with an old prescription. He can't see without his glasses. I guess vision is not essential in Alabama. It's essential for my husband. He finally found a jewelry store that could repair the frames. They were allowing people in one at a time. I've been following you since 2006. You make so much sense. I've never written to the White House in my life, but 2 weeks ago I wrote and begged them to listen to you. Let's hope somebody listens to somebody soon. All right, on to the next one. Our lockdown started early. My little boy had an ear infection, regular thing for him as he suffers from glue ear, and he had raised temperature. The doctor remotely ordered our family, my husband and I, as well as our 22-year-old stepdaughter, to self-isolate with him for 2 weeks. After that, lockdown came. We missed an opportunity to get groceries like other families, taken totally by surprise. While finally our local authority helped us get a grocery delivery slot, there were several weeks when we had to ration fresh food, not something we've ever had to do before. At least we could afford to buy it. Many families depend on food banks and charity. While I busied myself with keeping the family fed and looked after, my husband struggled with sudden change of work mode from hands-on to remote, which had proven impossible. He became increasingly anxious and depressed, which had worsened his heart condition, led to a remote doctor's consultation and prescription for a drug which gave him an allergic reaction. It took several weeks for him to get back to where he was in the first place, and he has now signed off work and has some good days. My daughter lost her job in student lettings as a result of both the initial order of self-isolation and a sudden reduction in demand. She moved temporarily to her boyfriend's house, and they're both without work, spending time searching for jobs online, trying not to think about the future. We haven't seen her for ages. My boy has special educational needs. While the government told schools to provide education to vulnerable children, they did a risk assessment and told us it would not be safe for him to return. He gets weekly emails with suggested work, none adapted to his needs, so he can't really engage. He was already struggling before COVID, now falling further behind. We do our best, but lack expert knowledge to teach him effectively. We do a lot of cooking together. My husband taught him some do-it-yourself. He spends days running around the garden. I can't imagine how people cope in little flats. I'm trying to hold it together as best I can. When I go for my daily run early before the family gets up, I pass masked pedestrians walking to work in local hospitals. Before this, there would have been a nod or some eye contact. That's gone now. We've become disconnected. There's a great COVID story. This is Inconvenient, Fauci says. Inconvenient to have a child who's falling behind in school, an adult child who you can't see, unemployed, boyfriend unemployed, husband who has, I mean, this is inconvenient. Callous disregard. That's what this is. Thank you for your weekly messages. I know you put your heart into them, and I've learned so much. I'm also appalled and angry about what's going on. My daughter has spent 4 years working with children in Honduras. Fortunately, she came back to the States in December. She hears from her good friends in Honduras, and they're in a very bad situation, unable to work and no food. These are poor people who have no resources. They're kept in their homes by armed guards. I just can't understand it at all. Boy, that's inconvenient, being locked in your house by armed guards with no food. That is very inconvenient. Governor Mike DeWine, Republican, I'll note for the critics out there, of Ohio must be really proud of himself right now. The parents of a terminally ill child have been prohibited from both being in the same room with her at Nationwide Children's Hospital here in Columbus, Ohio. Autumn Ware is 7 years old and has a brain tumor. She was admitted to the hospital with a prolonged seizure and placed on a ventilator for support. She's in the ICU and her mother is with her. Her father is in the parking garage because he's not allowed in per orders from the governor and the idiot he appointed to run the state, Amy Acton. That's my editorial comment. According to an article in Ohio State House News, the family has tried to contact the governor to get an exception, but there's been no response. The governor and his partner in crime have been too busy with other things to worry about this particular weekend that this went on. The bars and restaurants were opening. Some people weren't maintaining the right social distance, so health authorities were out issuing tickets and making referrals for criminal prosecution. And by the way, they now have a patio patrol that drives around looking for people who are too close together. And they basically said that if you see a person in the restaurant who you know, you may not walk over and talk to them. That's dangerous, talking to people. All right, so anyway, Governor DeWine and Amy Acton and again, let's look at public health, all right? Fauci would call this inconvenient. I call this criminal behavior. You have a patio patrol walking around, separating adults on the patio, having a drink because they're too close together, while you're ignoring a dying child in the hospital who needs both of her parents with her. Right. Tell me how that's a good public health policy. I think that the Nazis would have been proud to have these people on their staff. And I'm talking about, just for the record, Republican governor. I told you I'm an equal opportunity critic. So anyway, I haven't ruled out that at some point in time they're going to establish concentration camps and start locking people up who just refuse to follow orders, because there are more and more of them who have just had it up to here. How much more of this do you think people are going to take before we're going to end up with mob rule? I'm not a fan of that. I'm not going to participate in mob rule, for the record. But how much more do you think people can take before they say enough already? Going on. This is my mom. It pains me to share this picture or share my horrible nightmare of the past 2 weeks. My mom is now a terminal victim of the COVID isolation measures, not the virus itself. She was isolated, then neglected at an assisted living facility in Western New York. No family was allowed to visit. No family was notified that she stopped eating in isolation, lost 30 pounds, was finally taken to a hospital a week and a half ago, and it was too late. I traveled and was allowed to visit her in hospital only because she was put on comfort measures. They would not keep her past yesterday, where she was transferred to a nursing home to die alone due to the no exception isolation policy, which will happen within the next couple days. Please remember the space of COVID measure victims. There are many more. Let's open the country up. I wish to God my mom had gotten COVID-19 in mid-March when the isolation measures were enacted. At least they might have sent her to the hospital for treatment, because apparently COVID is the only condition that matters to those who care for the elderly now. Signed, Heartbroken, in Northern Virginia. So this woman stops eating, loses 30 pounds, and family's not allowed in. This is great public health. Fauci, this is inconvenient. Disconnected criminal is what he is. He's a criminal. This is, you prosecute people who do these kinds of things to people, who treat people in this inhumane way. On Saturday, my friend and client, I will not have the name here, passed away. I'm so sad and angry, not that it's ever a good time to die or go through the many difficulties of cancer, but doing it during this COVID pandemic is horrific. She turned 59 on April 8th. Her mom and sister had booked plane tickets at the beginning of March to visit her for her birthday. Due to COVID, they were not able to visit her before she passed away. On April 13th, the pain she was experiencing was so bad, her daughter took her to the ER. She stayed in the hospital alone for 4 days and then was released to hospice care. At the end of March, when she really started going downhill, I asked her if there was something she really wanted to do. She wanted to go to the beach. I was unable to grant her wish because the beaches were closed due to COVID. There are so many more atrocities I witnessed her going through during her cancer treatments, but I can't continue typing right now. I'm just so furious with the whole medical establishment and overcome with sadness. Great public health policy. Dying cancer patients, keeping them off the beach, that is definitely helpful. That helps you address the crisis. Inconvenient, terribly inconvenient, Mr. Fauci. Going on, I've tried to keep my opinion to myself on this for the most part, but I'm done doing this. My husband was diagnosed April 22nd with stage 4 melanoma that has metastasized to his bones, lungs, and liver. The bone issue has been the worst. He has a tumor on his spine that's pushing into his spinal cord along with other lesions and 4 fractures in the spine. Also a very large tumor on the upper left portion of his left lung with nodules and spots on both sides. He had an MRI of his spine done on April 22nd, directed to take him to the ER from their findings. He was hospitalized from April 22nd through the 29th when no visitors were allowed because of COVID. It's always good to keep sick people isolated from family and friends. Imagine getting that type of news and then basically being dumped at the ER by yourself and staying there for a week, learning all the places they've discovered more cancer. Long story short, he had to be admitted again last Saturday. It took us all day to talk him into going, and he told us he would not stay. He had a fever and he was confused. I was able to go in this time for about 20 minutes because of his confusion. Then they told me I had to leave. The ER doctor asked him some questions, and my husband thought it was June of 2002, but I couldn't stay. I had to have a 20-minute phone conversation with my husband and the ER doctor because my husband was refusing to stay. His oxygen was down to 82. His labs had lots of issues. Finally talked him into staying. He called me last night completely confused, and that's the last time I've heard from him. He's not answering his phone. I called the nurse, and she said he's not with it enough to talk on the phone. It's totally breaking my heart. And who is there for him to make decisions for him? Who is there to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with him? If they can't get him healthy enough for treatment, they're sending him home with hospice, but I feel they may have just robbed us from the last few days when he might have been lucid. Conversations we may have had if we'd been able to be there. I'm beyond heartbroken right now. We're just supposed to sit back and let this happen to our loved ones. I can't believe this is my country. There are not words to describe what I'm feeling at this moment. Something has to change. This hospital is Spectrum Health in Grand Rapids, a hospital that's doing massive layoffs because of no patients. He finally died, this guy, by the way. Finally died. Unbelievable. Great public health policy. This is very, very good. People must be very proud of themselves who are instituting this. And Fauci calls this, it's inconvenient that your husband is confused and in the hospital and can't answer his phone and dies alone. Very inconvenient, right? My husband's heart was failing back in 2014. He had extremely high blood pressure, and it was weakening his heart. His heart had an ejection fraction of only 32%. He had other health issues as well. I finally was able to get him to follow the plant-based diet that I had used to cure my lupus. He lost 60 pounds, improved his heart function, and cured his other ailments as well. He's taking a quarter of the blood pressure medicine he was taking previously. His last echocardiogram showed an ejection fraction of 68%. He returned to work 2 weeks ago at a dental office, but he doesn't work on patients, just at the front desk. They required him to wear a mask and a face shield. This is utterly ridiculous. A few days of this, his blood pressure began to rise. He was depriving himself of oxygen and damaging his heart. Working and following the mandates was literally killing him at his desk. After a week and a half, his blood pressure was up to 158/98. His cardiologist increased his medication, too ignorant of the fact that he couldn't breathe enough oxygen. How can I know this, but a specialist doesn't? I told him just don't wear it, refused to put it on. He was concerned what the consequences would be. I said, make them fire you, don't comply, and don't quit your job out of frustration. Force them to take action. They don't want to deal with the consequences of firing you. It worked. They finally quit making him wear the shield, and he can take the mask off if he's not speaking to anybody directly. His blood pressure is down to normal once again. I already told my employer if masks become mandatory, once daycares open up, I will not wear one. They will be forced to fire me. My teenage boys are both failing. This is the same woman. the fourth quarter because the school closure and the ignorant governor of Ohio is already talking about possibly not opening schools in the fall. I'm considering refusing to participate in this homeschooling next year if I can protect myself and my kids. I could see the government threatening to take my kids from me. I don't feel like I live in reality anymore. I'm surrounded by mostly ignorant sheep. Many people around me that don't support the shutdown are complacent, doing nothing to stop it. This is what the government counts on, people just following along. Well, I'm not following along. I'm not following along. We're working on something here. We'll be talking about it in a couple of weeks, but I think you're going to be very excited about. You know, these people keep talking about a new normal. I have a different kind of new normal in mind. So stay patient, stay sane and safe for just a little bit longer, and I'll tell you what we're going to do about it, because we are not helpless. This is not inconvenient, Mr. Fauci. This is horrific. This is criminal activity. This is callous disregard for human life. People who do this are criminals, and they should be prosecuted. That's not the biggest part of our plan. The biggest part of our plan involves citizens taking their lives and their country back. So I'm working on it. I'll be back to you, both with more news and announcements about that. Stay safe, stay sane. Pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it. I'll be back to you next week with more news.